NBA free agency is absolutely a freak show. I'm sure you and I can agree that as years have progressed forward, the NBA's free agency landscape is probably one of the most exciting moments of the year, and I think this has started ever since LeBron James really went from the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Miami Heat and started and pretty much shattered the mold of a star NBA player staying on his team for the entire duration of his career. After that, we saw crazy moves such as Chris Paul demanding a trade to the Los Angeles Clippers, and eventually it got crazier and crazier. We saw Kevin Durant, who, I don't want to bash Kevin Durant, I don't mean this in a bashful way, but literally left the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2016 after blowing a 3-1 lead to the Golden State Warriors, who were 73-9, and ended up joining the Golden State Warriors. And ever since then, you just have stars running back and forth from team to team to team. And this past offseason, you saw 16 of 24 All-Stars literally switch teams. And it's actually insane. Like, you saw players like Kyrie Irving, who was on an established team in the Boston Celtics with a great coach and a great front office, change teams to the Brooklyn Nets to team up with Kevin Durant, who literally left the best team in the West, the Golden State Warriors, who also have a great front office, who are in California, a great place to live, who were willing to offer him a max deal despite him tearing his Achilles, which many of us believe is a career-ending injury, to team up on the Brooklyn Nets. And you see the New York Knicks, who were really excited about potentially getting all these players, strike out. You saw the New Orleans Pelicans, who just drafted Zion Williamson, become even stronger through free agency by signing JJ Redick and trading for Derek Favors. You see, I could keep going on and on. You see star players like DeMarcus Cousins with reports that there's literally no market for him this offseason. You see players like Jimmy Butler spurn contending teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, who are willing to give him a max deal to go to the Miami Heat. Now, the simple question I'm asking here is, what does the NBA free agency have that the NFL free agency doesn't? Sure, I understand that in the NBA, there's smaller teams, so each player is therefore more valuable. An NBA starting five is 5 players. An NFL lineup on offense or defense, usually you have 11 players on the field, but at the same time, there is always going to be star players and players that you could literally build teams around. For example, players like Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., Saquon Barkley, which 2 of those 3 players actually switched teams this past offseason, but we could all agree that NFL's free agency is not nearly as exciting as the NBA's free agency, and one can't help but wonder why. Well, there is a reason why. So for those of you guys that aren't familiar with how the NFL's free agency works, there is something called the franchise tag. In the NFL, after a player gets drafted, they usually can hit the open market after 5 years. In the NFL, after a player has been drafted, he typically signs a 4-year contract with a 5th-year team option. And we could all agree that in the NFL, there's a lot of unpredictability. A player's prime could last anything from 3 years to hey, if you're really lucky, you could stretch that to 7 years, but the average is about 3 years. So a player could completely run through his prime by the time his rookie contract is up. But on top of that, say after the 5th-year option, say he's ready to hit the open market, there's one thing that's completely stopping him from controlling his destiny, and that is the franchise tag. Now, for those of you guys that are strictly basketball viewers that are curious about what the franchise tag is, the franchise tag is pretty much a tag you could apply to any player on your team that's about to be a free agent, and if you apply this tag, they pretty much have to sign with your team for 1 more year, and he gets paid the average of the top 10 players' salaries in that position. So an example of this would be DeMarcus Lawrence. He was probably the top player on the open market this year. So was Jadeveon Clowney. Both edge rushers, ready to hit the open market, and they both got hit with franchise tags. And what happens with this is there's no longer any mayhem. There's no longer any chaos like there would be in the NBA. There's no winning the NBA championship or winning the Super Bowl and then having the entire world sitting down waiting to see where you're going to go next. I'm talking about you, Kawhi Leonard. Now, if this was to happen in the NBA, think of it this way, which I'm sure there would be some sort of modification. Just imagine that it was the end of the NBA season. You know, all these free agents are about to hit the market, and Kawhi Leonard gets hit with the franchise tag. He has to go back to Toronto. And heck, if the franchise tag even existed, Kawhi Leonard would probably not even be a Raptor. The San Antonio Spurs would say, screw your trade demand. We're keeping you this year. Because we could tag you as much as you want. In the NFL, you could tag a player for up to 3 years, but no team will typically do that because that means you're paying a huge salary for 3 years for one player. Now, think of it this way. In the NFL, with all that said and done, a player could stay on a team for about 8 years. And then if a player is very coveted, you could pretty much convince him to stay on the team or keep him on the team against his will for the duration, for way over his prime if you really wanted to. And I think that's what's really holding the NFL back, because imagine if there was no franchise tag. Imagine if quarterbacks like Dak Prescott were going to hit the open market next year. Imagine the years where Patrick Mahomes would hit the open market. Or the closest thing we had in the NFL to a good or average quarterback, I guess we could say after a year, hitting the open market was the case of Kirk Cousins about a year ago. And that was a very interesting case where Kirk Cousins steps in for the Washington Redskins, plays a decent couple of years for the Redskins, but they weren't really sold on his talent, so they hit him with the franchise tag. And they kept on tagging him until after 2 years of the franchise tag, they said, okay, we're going to go in a different direction. They traded for another quarterback, Alex Smith, and Kirk Cousins, since he was considered to be an average quarterback, and average to above average quarterbacks don't typically hit the open market, the Minnesota Vikings went and overpaid him to be their quarterback. Now, that could pay off. Whether that pays off or it doesn't, that doesn't really matter, but you could understand how the NFL would be infinitely more exciting if they remove the franchise tag. Sure, every single player in the NFL may have different value. Sure, star players in the NFL, depending on the situation, could influence and impact teams differently. But look at this past offseason in the NFL. It was definitely one of the more exciting off seasons because you had players like Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham, 2 star wide receivers, leave their teams. They got traded, and that was probably one of the most exciting things we've seen in NFL offseason, because NFL off seasons typically don't have that excitement, typically don't have that type of drama. Players like Le'Veon Bell had to jump through hula hoops in order to avoid the whole problem with the franchise tag. He literally had to not sign his franchise tag, not play in the NFL for a year, and then he got a chance to hit the open market once again after losing on a $1 million contract, after losing 1 year's worth of salary. The Jaguars got a new quarterback in Nick Foles, but Nick Foles, of course, he won a Super Bowl. Of course, that performance was amazing, but Nick Foles hitting the open market wouldn't be as exciting as Aaron Rodgers hitting the open market after being frustrated with the way Green Bay handles things. It wouldn't be as think about the case of Aaron Rodgers for a second. He's a player that didn't get along with his head coach, Mike McCarthy. He did seem a little frustrated with the front office, and honestly, they could have had a situation where Mike McCarthy stayed and Aaron Rodgers started taking meetings with various teams. And the last time I really think a player of that caliber really hit the open market was the case of Peyton Manning. When he was a free agent, I believe it was in 2012, Peyton Manning hits the open market. The Colts didn't want to re-sign him because they had the number 1 overall pick. and Andrew Luck was theirs for the taking. And Andrew Luck was very hyped up coming out of college. So Peyton Manning hit free agency and started taking meetings with the 49ers, with the Broncos. You heard all these rumors about where he's going to go. Eventually he signs with the Broncos, but imagine how exciting that would be. Imagine the top quarterbacks in the league. Imagine Patrick Mahomes in 3 years from now trying to figure out where he's going to sign. Imagine him taking meetings and listening, and eventually some team promising him something ridiculous, such as, we're going to bring you in, we're going to team you up with Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham, we're going to form a super team. The NFL would be way more exciting if they didn't have the franchise tag. Now, if you disagree with me, I want to hear why in the comment section down below, but I don't think I'd get a lot of people disagreeing with me. If you do so, why? And if you enjoy my content, you enjoy basketball and football analysis, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. I'm your boy, Theflightmike. I'll catch you guys later.